Hello, we will discuss the process Alma fiscal period closure, which is a process of closing a fiscal period and moving to the next fiscal period. The process in Alma is built out of two main processes. One of them is the rollover ledger, and the second one is the rollover PO line. The rollover ledger. The rollover ledger is simply copying the ledgers from current fiscal period, the source fiscal period, to the next fiscal period. This process checks if the next fiscal period exists and active. But if the fiscal period does not exist, it creates the next fiscal period based on a local fiscal period. The start and the end of the next fiscal period will be exactly as start and end of local fiscal period, but 1 year later. The job will also copy the ledgers and their funds, all summary and allocated funds, from a source fiscal period to the target fiscal period. The job has the following parameters, and we will go over and see the screenshot and how it actually works in Alma. The parameters are create allocation, which has a yes/no value. This field assumes to create allocations to allocated funds based on the source fiscal period sum of allocations. You can either create the ledgers and funds with allocations or without allocations. But pay attention that if funds are created with no allocations, you may need to go and allocate money for them in order to be able to create encumbrance and create orders on them. The next parameter is ledger. We can either roll over all the ledgers or a specific one by selecting from the list. There is also an action, which is a copy or delete. The copy is when we want to copy the ledgers to the next fiscal period. But if we made a mistake and we want to delete a ledger that we copied, the action delete is for that. And action delete is actually working on one ledger at a time. You can delete a ledger from the next fiscal period only if no encumbrance or expenditures transactions were made on any of its funds. If no transactions except allocations were made on the ledger's funds, then it can be deleted. If you selected create allocation yes, a new field is added to the screenshots. It's called FPC factor, which is a percent of a factor that may be added to the allocation. The FPC factor is only if the allocation were created, and if allocation were created, the factor is used in order to increase or decrease the allocated amount due to interest or any other reason. This field is a numeric field. The value is percentage. The next parameter is create status. This will define what status the ledger and funds will be created. It can be created as draft or active. But pay attention, if you create the funds and the ledgers as draft, you need to activate them manually before you do any of rollover PO line or any transaction you want to make on them, because transactions cannot be made on a draft ledgers and funds. And the last parameter is the from year. From year currently has two options. It holds the name or the description of the current and the previous fiscal period. You can either roll over ledger from previous to current or from current to next. Let's go to Alma and see how these processes are executed in Alma. Let's start with demonstrating rollover ledger from the beginning and continue to the rollover PO line. First, I want to show you that by looking at the fiscal period that this institution has, we can see currently we have 3 fiscal period. All of them are active. Currently we have the previous one is ended at 2012, and the current one is ended at 2013, and the next one which is currently open, it doesn't have to be exist, but if it doesn't exist, the rollover ledger will create it, and you can see that it's ended at 2014. Let's see what do we have on these PO lines, on these ledgers. We go to the fund and ledgers just to verify that we do not have anything that belongs to the fiscal period that ended at 2014. So let's start by demonstrating the rollover ledger. Rollover ledger is a job that can open from the main menu of acquisition, advanced tool, rollover ledgers. Click the add job. Now I want to demonstrate what happens if we create a location, what happens if we do not create a location. You can see that I can choose from 2 fiscal period because the rollover can allow me to roll over ledgers that created in previous fiscal period. But if all of them were rolled, I will not get anything by clicking the ledger. If I go to the current fiscal period, none of them was rolled to the next fiscal period. You can see that I have a list of all the ledgers exist in current fiscal period and was not yet rolled. Let's start by not creating a location, moving on all the ledgers with copy action, and we'll create them first as draft. Add and close will run the process with the parameters that we just gave it. Wait until the process is completed. This screen is actually showing the list of all the rollover ledgers processes that was executed in this institution. The last one that we saw is we can see that it's completed successfully, and let us know that 43 ledgers or funds were rolled. We can see the report. This is the report of the rollover ledgers. We can see that we copied with a draft status, and now in order to check what happened, we go to the funds and ledgers, and now we can see that this fiscal period exists. And if we take all the ledgers and the funds from this fiscal period, we can see that they were rolled with no allocation. You can see that the available balance is 0, cash balance is 0, encumbrance is 0, all of them is 0, and status is draft. Now, if we want to roll over PO lines, we have to make sure that all the ledgers are active status. So in this situation, I cannot start rollover PO lines. I may go and activate the ledgers one by one, or if by mistake I made it, I just want to demonstrate the delete option. So we will go to the rollover ledgers and re-execute it with the delete mode and see what happened. Okay, now I want to demonstrate the rollover ledger with the delete option, and you can see that delete option I can run on current fiscal period and the next fiscal period. If I'm selecting next fiscal period, I can either delete ledger one by one or delete all of the ledgers. Add and close will again run the job. This is if I by mistake roll over the ledgers with draft status and I want to delete it and rerun the process with a different status. So maybe I want to delete one ledger from the next fiscal period. So we can see that the process completed successfully. Of course, 43 of it was succeeded. So assumption is all the ledgers were deleted from fiscal period that ended in 2014, and you can see that it does not exist here. So now let's rerun the process. Let's add allocations with no factor, all the ledgers from current fiscal period with status active. This will create the funds and ledgers in the next fiscal period with status active, and allocation is calculated from the current fiscal period allocation. Wait until the process is over to go and see that everything was smooth. We can go to the report to see what happened in the report. We don't have much information currently on this because there is no much information to put, except that 43 ledgers, 65 summary funds, and 132 allocated funds were successfully rolled. We can go to the funds and ledger list, filter it for, you see that we have the fiscal period that we're talking about, and now you can see that we have it status active, it has allocations, and everything is ready now to execute the PO line rollover. Pay attention that the rollover ledger is the base process that we must execute before we can start working on the next fiscal period, because this is the process who creates and activate the next fiscal period, and this is the process that we are using to create the funds and ledgers on the next fiscal period. The next process, and the main one, is the PO line rollover. The PO line rollover job, before we execute it, we must ensure that we do have a next fiscal period. The next fiscal period is active. We have allocated funds. All of them are active. This is a prerequisite of the PO line rollover job. Okay, executing the PO line rollover job, we use the following parameters. Same as the rollover ledger, the rollover PO line also has a parameter. The first one is the new encumbrance calculation. These parameters tells the job how to calculate the new encumbrance in the next fiscal period, whether it will be based on expenditure or based on encumbrance. Please note that this parameter is relevant only for continuous orders, continuous and standing order. For one-time PO line, we use only the based on encumbrance. We do not use based on expenditure. FPC factor is same as we had in the rollover ledger. If we want to increase the price of the encumbrance by any interest percentage, we add it here. From here again, we can use from either current or previous fiscal period that we want to roll the PO line from. Now we added two new checkbox. One of them is check over encumbrance. Check over encumbrance by default is true, and this means that when the PO line is rolled, Alma checks that the fund, the allocated fund, has enough money, and if it's not, it goes and checks for the over encumbrance rules. If we go to Alma, we see in funds, every fund and ledger, they have rules that define whether this fund can be over encumbered, over expended, and so many other rules, and you can see it here. The over encumbrance allowed here is yes, but you can see that the over encumbrance warning percent is 0 and the limit is 0. So basically it allows, but you need to increase the value if we want to create over encumbrance. So if over encumbrance is not allowed and the fund does not have enough money, does not have available balance for it, it cannot create the rollover. But if we uncheck the over encumbrance, this parameter, it means that the rollover PO line will not check this rule, meaning that Alma doesn't care if the fund has or doesn't have enough money for it. It will create the encumbrance. This is for institutions that are used to create the next fiscal period and roll over the PO lines and then take care of allocations and monetary issues. The next parameter, report mode, is another checkbox that we added to the job. This is telling Alma to run the job but do not keep anything in the database. What will happen is that the rollover PO line will run and all the errors and all the events and the report will be created, but the PO lines will not be rolled, will not be kept in the database. This is actually give us a preliminary review of what can happen if we run PO line rollover now, how the system looks now, and we go and click rollover PO line. And since rollover PO line is very difficult to undo, and we sometimes need a lot of work to do in order to recover from rollover, it's better to run it on report mode first. So if we want to run it on report mode, we check the report mode. The default value of it is false. This is the screen of the job. Let's look at it at Alma. We go to Alma menu, acquisition menu, advanced tool, rollover PO lines, and you can see all the rollover PO lines jobs that were executed in this environment. We click add a job, and this is the parameter screen that opened. As I said, the first parameter, new encumbrance, will be calculated by default based on encumbrance. We can change it to based on expenditure. The FPC factor by default is empty or 0. From here, we can see that the rollover will be by default from current fiscal period, but we can also select the previous one. We cannot select the next one for rollover PO line. The check over encumbrance by default is true. If we don't want Alma to check over encumbrance rules, we uncheck this field. And report mode by default is false. If we want this job to run in report mode, we click this checkbox. And now we can click add or add and close. And we'll see that the job is now in pending and running. This job takes some time to run, so instead of waiting for this one to complete, we can go and look on the report of previously running. Before we go over the report, let's talk about the workflow of the rollover PO line job. First, we discuss the population. The population is all active PO lines that have encumbrance on the relevant fiscal period, and they are not stated as fully invoiced. So, if a PO line is in status in review and we just created it and we saved it and we created encumbrance, then this PO line is a candidate for rollover. It is active. And even if we put this PO line in deferred, or we put the PO line in claim list, it doesn't matter because Alma regard these PO lines as active and they are candidate for rollover. The flow of the rollover: sum the total encumbrances in the source fiscal period. So In order for a PO line to be a candidate, it needs to have an encumbrance on the source fiscal period. If, for example, you have a PO line that has an encumbrance in 1997, the last encumbrance, it will not roll if we run rollover from current fiscal period. Never mind that it is active, and never mind that we continue getting invoices or anything on this PO line. Since the encumbrance is not in current fiscal period, it is not candidate for rollover. If we want to roll it, we need to create the encumbrance even manually by selecting funds from current fiscal period, and then it will be a candidate for rollover. The next step is Alma deletes the encumbrances and disencumbrances transaction from source fiscal period. It finds the relevant fund in target fiscal period. The relevant fund is found by the fund code. So if the fund is not found, maybe the rollover ledger did not roll it, or maybe it's an old one and you want to replace it by a new one, and that's why Alma does not find it. It will issue an error to the report. Fund for next fiscal period was not created for fund and the fund name, and it will continue to the next PO line. The next step is creating the transactions on the new fiscal period fund. Now, how the transactions are created, it depends on the continuity of the PO line and what the user selected for the encumbrance calculation. So, if the continuity is one time, we said that one time is only based on encumbrance. Alma checks that there is a remaining encumbrance and the PO line is not fully invoiced. So if we have a PO line, it is a one-time PO line. It costs $100, so we have encumbrance of $100, and we have a disencumbrance of $50, so we have a remaining of $50. What will happen is an encumbrance of $100 will be created in the next fiscal period, and a disencumbrance of $50 will be created. So in total we have encumbrance of $50 on the next fiscal period. Pay attention that if you add anything to the FPC factor, it will not affect one-time PO line. Now, if the continuity of the PO line is continuous, we believe that these are the main population of PO lines that are going in the PO line rollover, and the calculation is based on encumbrance. The new encumbrance will be equal to the old encumbrance, taking into account the FPC factor. But if user selected based on expenditure, Alma will compute the total expended balance from the previous or the source fiscal period. It will create a new encumbrance from the total expenditures, update the PO line list price. If the price, the new encumbrance, and the PO line price are different, in order to prevent from the PO line to be under or overfunded, we need to update the PO line price. But if users selected based on expenditure and one PO line does not have any expenditure transaction, Alma will use the encumbrance for this PO line in order to calculate the new encumbrance. So as we said, PO line rollover population are all active PO lines which are not cancelled or closed. For one-time PO line, if the order is fully invoiced, it will not be rolled. For one-time PO lines, if there is no remaining encumbrance, it will not be rolled. PO line cannot have zero amount in price. If the institution best practice is using a zero amount just in order to mark the fund, we recommend to use 1 cent instead of 0. Deferred PO lines are treated as active and they are also candidate for rollover. PO line rollover job will issue a report of how many PO lines succeeded and how many failed and their failure reason, and each reason will be a link to the PO line list. Adding a rollover PO line job, the new encumbrance calculation, I will rename it as encumbrance. I will not add factors. Select current year. I will remove the check over encumbrance. Remember that the check over encumbrance check that the ledger has enough money to encumber. I'm positive that all the ledgers that I just wrote have enough money for encumbrance. I can leave it, but just for the sake of convenience I will remove it, because if something will fail due to money, I don't want to disturb the process. I can run it in report mode. This, if you remember, will run the rollover PO line job in a mode that it will only display and create a report that what happened in the system as if I ran it in a regular mode, meaning nothing is really rolled. Nothing is created in the next fiscal period. No encumbrance. PO lines are not changed, but the process is running and said I want to roll this PO line. What would be the outcome of rolling this PO line? If it goes smooth, it will say success. If it doesn't, it will fail, and I will see the end picture of the rollover PO line, and I can work on issues if I try to prevent them from having it in a real mode. So now I will run it in a real mode, execute the job. You can see that I have a job. This job takes much longer than the rollover ledgers, and this is because a lot of PO lines, most of them are continuous PO lines, are calculated from current fiscal period to the next fiscal period. Encumbrance are created, and sometimes if I change the method of calculation, I want to make it based on expenditure, it may affect the PO line price. Even if I add an FPC factor, then the process must go to the PO line and change the list price of the PO line, so we will not have any issues with funding, overfunded, underfunded. So this is why the process is much more heavy than the rollover ledger. I can see that rollover PO line completed successfully. This is a demo environment. There are not much of a PO line in it, and I can see that 56 PO lines rolled. If we look on the report, this is the rollover PO line report. I can see the general data of the report. I can see the job parameters. I ran from current with no check in the over encumbrance, calculated based on encumbrance, no FPC factor, and no report mode. And I got everything smooth. So I can look at this and see the PO line rollover success and see the number of PO lines that succeeded, and each error that may occur, I can see that I have 0 PO line in it. If I click on the rollover PO line success, I will get the list of all PO lines that rolled in this process. 56 PO lines. And now to close this issue, let's go to the funds and ledger now. And we can see that fiscal period that we are talking about ended at 2014. We have transactions in it of encumbrance. Let's look at the allocated fund and see that this allocated fund has a transactions that rolled over for PO line. We have 5 PO lines, and each PO line with its own amount. I can go into the PO line and see that the PO line price is $120, and I can see that it uses now the accounting and finance e-resources of fiscal period 2014. Now we completed rollover ledgers, and we completed rollover PO line, and now this environment is ready to work with the new fiscal period that ended at 2014. The next time that we will have to run the FPC, the fiscal period closure process, will be at December 2014. Okay, now let's go on a few questions that we had from many institutions, so we will go over it. The first one is, if a continuous order that was open in 2013 but should be paid only in 2014 or later, will it be rolled? The answer is yes. We assume that these orders are still active and may receive an invoice later on, so the order needs to be encumbered. Even if you created an order at the end of the year and you said, oh, it's the end of the year, what am I going to do? Do I need to recreate it in the next year? No, the rollover job will take it for you. If there is an encumbrance in 2013 but no expenditure, what would be the result of the rollover? The rollover is based on expenditure, and if there is no expenditure, Alma will use the original encumbrance in this case. How can a user tell for a given PO line for which fiscal period the encumbrance and the expenditures are related to? We added to the fund, we added the fiscal period it belongs to. If you look here, you see that the fund AAA1 is belong to fiscal year 2013, and it's also in the fund list and wherever a fund is displayed. It will be easier for the user to understand which fiscal period this fund belongs to. Some institutions are planning to roll over specific library based on expenditure and other libraries based on encumbrance. Can it be supported? Currently, this is not supported by Alma, but if, for example, an institution is using a specific ledgers, it can be achieved by rolling over these ledgers first and running rollover PO line based on expenditure, and then afterward, after the rollover PO line completed, rolling over the rest of the ledgers by rollover ledgers and rerun the rollover PO lines. For the PO lines that were already rolled, they will not be rolled over once again because they do not have encumbrance on current fiscal period. So this is kind of a workaround, but we are thinking of a way to give the option to run the rollover PO line based on for a specific library. When a new fiscal period arrives, i.e. the midnight of May 31st, do we need to do a special activity with 2013 ledgers and funds? The answer is no. You do not need to do any special activities, but if you want, you can close it. It will not appear in any creation of new PO line since the end date of the fiscal period arrived. Can a remaining fund be transferred from source fiscal period fund to target fiscal period? In order to do that, the system needs to be set up in a way that the fiscal period is still active and have enough grace period, and this might be achieved by setting up the system correctly. Okay, that was the fiscal period closure session. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.